Okay, members, I welcome you to the Victoria County Council. Go to the first item on the agenda, which is acknowledgement of country. Council acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands where we work and live. Council celebrates the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of the New South Wales Central Tablelands. Item 1, apologies. I know we have an apology from Bruce Watt. Can I have a mover, please? Member Reynolds, Member Leslie, seconded. All in favour? Aye. Move to item 2, disclosure of interest. The recommendation is that council members are reminded of their obligations under council's code of conduct to disclose and appropriately manage conflicts of interest. 2, if any member has any declaration of interest, they should do so now. Do I have any declarations of interest? Can I have someone to move the recommendation? Second, so Councillor Ewan, Councillor Smith, Member Smith. Again, I ask, are there any declarations of interest? No declarations of interest noted. Item 3, we have a financial statement presentation from Leanne Smith. The recommendation is that council enable and note the presentation provided by the Audit Office New South Wales Contractor Director, Ms. Leanne Smith of Intentus, and that she will be attending by Zoom. Can I have a mover, please? Member Fry, Member O'Connor. Thank you. Can we open the presentation if she's available online, please? Not there?
Here you go. Reading forward.
Hello.
Maybe we'll move to item 4 and come back to item 3. So item 3 is the Local Government New South Wales Conference. We have 2 notices of motion. That's item 4. I was going to move to that straight away. Well, pending.
Yeah, that's fine. Yep.
Now, does someone want to move that we move to item 4 if you'd like?
Yeah.
Member Connor and Smith. All in favour?
Aye.
Oh.
Can I rescind the previous?
Can you rescind the previous motion, please? Right. We rescind the previous one. We will go back to item 3, financial statement presentation by Leanne Smith of Intentus. Recommendation, council enable and note the presentation provided by the Audit Office, New South Wales Contractor Director Leanne Smith of Intentus, and that she will be attending by Zoom. Moved and seconded, as I think it was previously, and we all agreed to it. So we have the presentation. Thanks, Leanne.
Hello. Obviously, Lisa, you're driving this, are you, at your end?
Is that okay?
Yeah, no, that's terrific. Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. I'm obviously here as a representative of Intentus, who are the contract or the audit service providers on behalf of the New South Wales Audit Office for Upper Macquarie's audit. We'll probably just move on to next one, Lisa, if that's okay. Okay. So the operating result for this year, which we'll get into the detail a little bit further through. So it was lower than the prior year, sitting at $18,000 this year compared to $137,000 last year. There was only one full aerial spraying program completed during the year. You would all be very well aware that whether or not that aerial spraying program goes ahead in full makes a big impact on council's results for the year. So obviously only being able to do one spraying program for the year impacted on that result. That was impeded obviously by the lockdown, and also there were delays with chemical supply, as there were delays with many things during last year in particular. There was also some increased expenditure on roadside spraying that was undertaken by council during the year, which was about $100,000. So then if we look at the operating result, the numbers, as I said, for this year, there was a result of $18,000 after expenditure and after depreciation, compared to 137 in 2021. 2021 did have 2 full aerial spraying programs completed. And then again, as those of you who've been around for a little while would be aware, but as you can see from the numbers, those results have popped around a little bit between 2018, 19 and 20. And again, that was the aerial spraying program, primarily due to weather conditions in those years. There were issues with it. So in terms of revenue, which I think is the next, consolidated revenue and expenditure. So total expenditure for the year was 1.638 million and total revenue was 1,656,000. So in terms of the total figures, not too dissimilar from the prior year, but obviously that gap in the revenue figure is what's really made the difference. In terms of looking at a breakdown of the revenue, again, you can see that user charges and fees figure bobs around from year to year, and that is primarily influenced by that aerial spraying program. The grants figure is generally around the same level from year to year. There hasn't historically been a lot of grants outside of the WAP that is available to Upper Macquarie. And then, as you can see, the other big item is the constituent council contributions, which have been growing from year to year, which is great for Upper Macquarie. And I'll leave the constituent councils to decide on how they feel about it. That's theirs. But certainly for Upper Macquarie, being able to get that extra support out of the constituent councils has been really important. We have also, in terms of expenditure, employee costs have remained fairly stable over the last couple of years. Again, there has been a little bit of movement upwards. You'd all again be aware there has been, in particular in relation to the general manager's role, there's been some times when there hasn't been a formal general manager in place. And that position has been covered off by primarily Lisa in an acting position. So that has impacted over the years. Materials and contracts. Probably just wanted to have a little look at this one. Normally we would see this number if the aerial spraying program is reduced. Normally the materials and services cost would reduce as well, sort of proportionately. That didn't happen this year, partly because there were some chemical sales that went through, but also the roadside spraying program saw the usage of those chemicals stay high. So we didn't see this financial year that normally I would have expected to see a reduction in that materials figure, given that a full aerial spraying program wasn't completed. The other expenditure, probably just a note on that one, as you'd be aware from your other council involvement, the main reason that item changed between 2019 and 2020 was a number of expenditure items that were previously accounted for or reported in that category were moved over to materials and services, and that was a requirement of the Code of Accounting Practice. It wasn't a council decision. So that's where the expenditure is looking at. So look, I'm happy to take any queries on the way through if anybody's got them. Probably should have said that at the start. So feel free to jump on in if you do have any.
So to our net profit, Leanne,
Yes.
how much do you think the aerial program contributes? Bearing in mind we would normally have 2, but we only had 1 this year.
Yes, that's right. And sort of historically, if you go back and look at the numbers historically, it's very obvious what impact either running a full, I think maybe, I think was it 2019, it was up a little bit. It was up, I think we got managed to get 1.5 programs in. The other 2 years in particular were impacted by the drought. So certainly the revenue, but also the profit margin that is made by Upper Macquarie on that aerial spraying program is really significant in terms of the overall result. And if it doesn't go ahead, historically, that really impacts on that operating result for the year.
So does it contribute, do the two programs contribute net profit of 60,000, would you say, just as using a figure?
Off the top of my head, I would struggle to answer that question. Sorry. But I'd certainly say,
there's additional expenditures which you have taken. I just
yep,
want
so if you added your additional expenditure, well, I would struggle to give you a confident answer on that one off the bat, but I can certainly have a look at it for you and come back to Lisa with that response.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Could I suggest, Mr. Chair, that maybe we actually get a P&L for aerial?
Yeah.
Is it a separate breakdown?
Yeah, I'd like to know because it does seem to have quite a major impact. And I know we agreed that we weren't going to lose money on the aerial program and we needed to make positive, but I was just interested to see where we are with it. Because it's likely this year we're only going to have one as well.
Yeah.
So could I just like to go back to a slide on the WAP funding, which does concern me because it's, which is the grant, how flat it is. I think pretty well 3 years in a row, the last 3 years, it's been very, very flat, which, and while we've only had inflation a couple of percent until this last 12 months, it's shown with it, as opposed to the constituent councils, and I know part of that is the roadside contribution, but it does show you that our revenue base, from which is roughly a third outside of the area of spraying, is very much flat. And even this year, potentially, we don't know the final outcome, again, it's going to be very flat. So while our costs are increasing and potentially our wages will start to increase, our revenue base from the grants is exceptionally flat. And I assume you've got no suggestions or solutions, Leanne, but it's just something that's a concern as a councillor when I look at it.
And look, that's always a concern, particularly, with a county council where you are very restricted in what you can actually do to generate revenue.
Yeah, well, we have a workshop following this. We will be looking at that side of things.
Okay, the one pleasing thing is, despite that probably lower than hoped for result, the cash figure is holding good, holding at a good level. It certainly hasn't gone backwards, it's gone upwards, which is pleasing to see. It's not, I guess, and that's probably coming back to that point about Upper Macquarie not really having a lot of flexibility in terms of what revenue streams there are out there for you. It is important, for council to have a cash buffer so that if something does come up, that you are able to take advantage of, you do have the resources to do that. Whereas a couple of years ago, that certainly wasn't the case. Cash investments. So the external restrictions for Upper Macquarie are pretty much limited to some grant funding. I think that's the one for the weeds handbook that hasn't been expended as yet. The rest of the internal restrictions, part of that, those restrictions or their allocations, they're termed now actually, have been determined by council. They had a slight increase during the year, which was some additional funds put aside in relation to biosecurity enforcement, which is, my recollection is that's basically putting the money that is recovered from PINs back and fines back through into that reserve. And then there's unrestricted amounts of, how much is that sitting there? Unrestricted for about $500,000 at the end of this financial year.
So a quick question on that, Leanne.
Yep.
Given that we're going to probably spend a large amount of capital buying 3 or 4 utes this financial year, plus other capital items.
Yep.
You would still be comfortable though if we, reduced say $150,000 somewhere in that vicinity and just made a small profit. I think we'd still be comfortable from a cash point of view.
I think so. I think so. And I mean, you've got, like, council's got $150,000 in its plant reserve, which is sitting in your internal restrictions. So it's already been flagged. And certainly you've got the funds there that that is going to allow you to do that without sort of impacting on your operating cash flows. Yeah. Okay, operating performance ratio. The one thing I would flag with this, so the benchmark is 0. It was at 7.9 last year. It was at 0.79 this year. What I would like to flag or just remind people is that because of the small size of the numbers involved with Upper Macquarie County Council, a small dollar value can make a really big change or cause a really big movement in these ratios. So this ratio is looking at whether its operating expenditure is contained within your operating revenue. So it's calculated as your operating revenue less your operating expenses. So essentially your result for the year, which is $18,000, and it's divided by your operating revenue to get this ratio. So your operating revenue didn't actually change that much in total, but the operating revenue less expenditure, so your operating result for the year, is what changed. So essentially that operating result moving from $18,000 this year and coming from the $130,000 last year, that's really what's caused the drop in that ratio. So it's not something that sort of from an audit perspective is raising any flags or any concerns. It's probably just that it seems exaggerated because of the size of the numbers we're dealing with.
So if we did have a negative ratio, Leanne, it's not the end of the world either, is it, if we made a small loss?
No. If it's like obviously if you were doing that for 5 or 6 years in a row, or maybe 3 or 4, that's a concern. But if it dipped into there, I can guarantee you there are plenty of councils in New South Wales who have ratios that are down in that negative figure. So it's certainly not the be all and end all. And they all need to be looked at. All the performance indicators need to be looked at in total and in conjunction with the other figures in the financials. They're not sort of they're not meant to be the only things that get looked at and that council gets assessed on. Yeah. This one is the own source operating revenue ratio, which we have talked about in previous years. The reality is for Upper Macquarie, the OLG benchmark is 60%. And again, I probably remember that these benchmarks are set for general purpose councils. Certainly for Upper Macquarie, there's little chance that you will ever meet that benchmark. And that's purely because you are so reliant on the weeds funding, but also the constituent council contributions. So that's sitting at around 33. That's relatively consistent with where it's been sitting the last few years. So again, even though you haven't met the benchmark, that's not something that would cause us concern knowing the nature of your council. Unrestricted current ratio. This has come down a little bit from the prior year, but again, it is still well above the OLG benchmark of 1.5. So this is looking at how much unrestricted current assets council has to satisfy its current liabilities. And as you'd be aware from the accounts, there was a bit of a shift in the receivables and payables this year, and that's also contributed to the change in that ratio. Again, it's come down from 7.6 to 5.2. Just remember, small dollar movements make big percentage movements for Upper Macquarie. But as I said, it's still well above that OLG benchmark of 1.5. And this is the other one, probably going back to that cash figure. It's looking at your cash expense cover ratio. So it's saying, well, if you had no money coming in at all, everybody stopped paying you, how long could you pay your bills before you ran out of cash? The OLG benchmark is greater than 3 months. Upper Macquarie is sitting at 12 at the moment. So the Audit Office did issue an unqualified audit report, the long form audit report, or the report on the conduct of audit, and also the statutory audit report on the general purpose accounts. Council met all of its reporting and disclosure obligations. I don't know where you were in the queue this year because I don't have anybody to ring at the OLG anymore, but the financial statements were lodged on the 16th of August, which I would be very surprised if that's not the first. I'd be very surprised if you weren't in the top 5. So again, you know, and not just from a, you know, getting it in and getting it done, but the fact that the financial statement and the audit process is over and done means that Lisa and Tim are, I guess, freed up to concentrate on this financial year as opposed to still trying to finish off last financial year. So it's a really good result from an operational perspective as well. A management letter was issued. There were no matters considered high risk for Upper Macquarie. The reason we do talk about high risk matters is because if there are high risk matters in your management letter, they do get included in the report to Parliament, but there were none for Upper Macquarie. And as always, you know, council staff, but Tim, but also, you know, Lisa is the one who does a lot of the legwork in terms of assisting our staff and helping with getting the audit completed. So big thank you to both of them for helping facilitate that again this year. So that's me. But again, I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has any in particular.
Got a couple, but I'll let someone else go before.
Well, I thought of a couple, but I'm not sure. Yeah, go on.
A couple I've already asked you and Eric there. Firstly, with regard to debtors to the county council, there is a higher level than normal. Is there any concerns there?
There are no concerns in relation to those. The timing of the aerial spraying program that was run this year was such that the invoices didn't sort of go out to the clients until June. So obviously they didn't have a chance to pay them. And off the back of that, that's also the reason the payables figure went up, because the contractor gets paid as council collects the funds from the property owners. So there's no concerns, and indeed, certainly off the back of that query in the ARIC, a significant amount of those had actually been collected subsequent to year end.
Another one, Bruce.
The other one is provisions, and I know the answer to this again, but our provisions have gone up compared to the previous year. So maybe a quick explanation on why our provisions for staff have gone up.
Yep. So part of it is, sorry, I'm just flipping to the right page. Part of it, there has been an increase in the time in lieu that is typically associated with the work the staff are doing in relation to the aerial spraying program. But also one of the other reasons that the provisions went up during the year is that the general manager came to Upper Macquarie from another council, and as such his leave entitlements were transferred over to Upper Macquarie, and there is they are cash backed. So even though the provisions have gone up, the council, so Midwestern, would have paid council across cash to back those liabilities.
Okay, thank you.
And one third question, and it's possibly to our staff, the $44,000 for the project that has now been there for 4 years. Any indication that it's going to be spent, or what's local land services doing?
Sorry, so yes.
Yes, we had a conversation the other last week with the person that's organising that. They're also heavily involved in the regional plan. So they sort of got put on the back burner what the plan had to get finished, and they're hoping to be back onto it in September.
So can you monitor it, please?
Yes.
It's been going. And now I'd like to ask the general manager, I think, has a question, so I'll ask him to address the question too.
Leanne, Tim Johnston speaking. Leanne, my question relates to council's preparation of the statements, not the statements themselves. We engaged an external accounting firm to assist the council in the process this year, and that didn't go according to plan. I was just wondering whether you'd mind commenting on whether there is a real need for us to receive that accounting expertise externally, or whether we may be better investing internally in trying to achieve the same outcome. But to me, it's caused several operational hiccups engaging with the external accounting firm.
Look, I don't believe, without getting into that, I don't believe there's any reason Lisa wouldn't be, or somebody internally wouldn't be capable of preparing the financial statements for council. I think it could be done internally with some upskilling and probably some training in the financial reporting package that's used, which is used by most of the councils across New South Wales. But I believe it could be done internally, definitely.
My understanding,
I have no qualms about that.
our chart of accounts is pretty ancient. Is there a need for us to review that and to try and improve it? I understand that mapping was quite a significant issue.
Yeah, look, I think possibly, and not necessarily just from the financial statement preparation, but possibly even from like a reporting perspective to council, that there could be a review of the chart of accounts done. So like something like the councillors, members were talking about before about, can we get some information on the profit and loss of the aerial spraying program? If the chart of account was restructured to accommodate some of those information requests, that information would be easily mapped at year end, but would also be really readily available to councillors during the year. So I think it's probably, I think it would probably benefit, you could probably benefit on both sides from a rejig of the chart of accounts. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Because it does very much at the moment, tends to lump things together. And I think maybe some more segregation might be helped. Yeah.
Thank you.
So in that context, if we were to revise our charter of accounts, are you able to assist with that if we need assistance?
I am not able to assist with that, but I can certainly review what council proposes and offer my comments on that.
Okay, understood.
We've got skills in the room.
Right, we've got skills group. Okay, any other questions, members or staff? Well, thank you very much, Leanne. Thank you for doing all the work on the audit of the accounts, and obviously we thank very much our own staff for their efforts in putting through the financials in a timely and efficient exercise.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Item 4 we go back to is the Local Government New South Wales Conference Notice of Motion. Two recommendations. Council submit motion 1, biosecurity fund for consideration by the Local Government New South Wales 2022 annual conference. Motion 2. Council submit motion 2, WAP funding for consideration by the Local Government New South Wales 2022 annual conference. I won't read out the motions. The motions are there with the background material on those pages. Can I have a mover in 2 parts? Councillor Reynolds, Councillor Smith, members Reynolds, member Smith. Okay, discussion on the matter, please.
Do you want me to explain the chair what I've submitted?
Explain the first one.
The first one is the biosecurity fund, which you may also want to have some input into as well. But we saw that it was important to try and get the support of Local Government New South Wales, i.e. the constituent, all the councils across the state, to try and pressure, I suppose you could say, on the state government to look at some form of biosecurity fund, whether it's for prosecutions or for undertaking control work. But the idea was to have it a little bit broader in the request, rather than having it as a prosecution fund per se, but a biosecurity fund to actually undertake work under the 2015 Biosecurity Act. But as it also states, primarily the prosecution of landholders, but to actually fund it, and given the small resources, as we've just heard from the auditors, the financial resources of this county council, that if matters were to go to court and extensive legal defence was to take place, that we would be stretched on resources to actually undertake further prosecutions. So therefore, it's proposed that this county council put forward a motion to the conference coming up later this year in the Hunter Valley with regard to this biosecurity fund. So I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair.
Do you want to talk to the second one or not at the stage?
No,
Do one at a time.
All right. Any other comments on the first one?
Yeah, I've got a comment. I think it's a mistake in that you're restricting it to county councils, because obviously there are general purpose councils that look after weeds that don't have.
Says both.
Says both, yeah.
Yeah, but I think it needs to be clearer.
Well, you can call it local control authorities.
Which it does.
Yeah.
The local weed control authority.
Council or county council.
So it's specifically designed, Mr. Chair, if I may respond, that for all councils, so local weed authorities or control authorities, sorry, across the state. Hence why it's going to the local government conference, because it'll impact on every local weed authority, or potentially benefit every local weed authority in the state.
It's just in the background comment.
Yeah, it is in the background, Bruce.
In the comment in the
Third line,
background.
weed control for the county councils. All councils should have those words.
Yes, the third line. That's right. The weed control authorities and county councils do not have the financial capacity. Well, it's not just that the county councils don't have the financial capacity. It's that all councils should be supported with this. All councils. And you're trying to broaden it.
No, I think that amendment's being made. I think it's noted in above under the motion, but it's not in the background. Yes, correct.
Well, perhaps the background should be.
So before we submit, can I suggest that you take up
My only comment with this, and I understand it's going wide, is that the mechanism being the trust fund, the administrator is based, and the use of an independent lawyer, as we've proposed at the State Weeds Committee, which we were asked to by DPI, is based on the fact that if we are going to prosecute or undertake the work, that an independent lawyer looks at the evidence to determine that if we went to court, we would have reasonable chances that the relevant local control authority would have reasonable chances of success. So in order to keep that structure in place, I'm not sure it would be in a position to go wider than doing, basically prosecuting, and seeking to recover the costs of cleanup. That was my only question.
And someone to pay the independent lawyer.
Sorry. Yes, and the fund is to pay the independent lawyer, but that gives whoever's administering us, whether it's DPI, a substantiation that if Upper Macquarie is taking someone to court and they want to draw on the fund for the cost of their legals and the cost of cleaning up, that if they were to go to court, they would have reasonable chances of success, so that the government knows that if there's a drawdown on the fund, it's reasonable. Member Fry.
Mr. Chair, I just have a question for Member Reynolds, and maybe I just want to ask him whether it's worth including in the motion that county councils and or controlling authorities have a say in the way it's designed or structured, so that the state government is the only designing body of a fund that eventually affects us if we were to draw on it from need.
If we go to the background, the paper we put to the State's Weeds Committee
Yeah,
actually sets out the structure we're proposing.
yeah. So I'm just saying,
because we were asked by DPI to do that.
yeah,
Yes, we could,
there's
but
nothing guaranteeing them including us in the design process.
no, but they know that we were asked to, and we put up a background paper, and we're continuing to have dialogue with DPI, including most recently last week.
Yep.
To convince them that, well, if we've put up a structure, if you don't agree with the structure, come back to us with an alternative.
Mm.
And I also asked that the State's Weeds Committee, and at this stage, I don't think we've had any alternatives, structure.
Great, so there's a level of trust that's been
There's a
established.
level of trust.
Yep.
I don't know that it's in our interest to go much beyond this, because we've already provided the background material. This will give us the leeway to have the discussions.
Member Reynolds concur?
I concur, in the discussions I had with DPI 3 weeks ago, so the DPI staff, they were more pushing towards some form of control work rather than prosecutions per se,
Mm.
hence why the motion was broadened out to be able to encompass potentially both. But as in, we as a county council and through the chair have put forward a proposal which outlines a potential way that, because one of the questions was who's going to administer it, this is from the DPI, who's going to administer it, how's it going to be administered, and how are you going to select prosecution cases if it was the case. And whereas in the proposed document from the chair, it actually outlines a process on how you would go through an independent selection process to judge whether there was enough evidence to potentially undertake prosecution.
And
We'd also,
If I might just Member Fry's comment as well. The other issue is, and the DPI has said to Member Reynolds about they're more interested in obviously the cleanup work. My question is, if they're proposing the cleanup work, are they proposing the government to fund it without recovering from the ultimate landholder? If not, and they're seeking to recover, they have to go through a court process, because otherwise they won't be able to get the money back. So we're not quite understanding at this stage the DPI position, because we're proposing that a court will order, it might be an installment, or as I said today, $100 a week or $100 a month that the court orders, but at least there's a way to recover the money of us going onto a property and cleaning up, albeit it's over a long period of time. Whereas DPI hasn't actually suggested how that's to occur, and it's like, well, Member Reynolds.
I worry if they're going to fund that side of it, then it's kind of chicken and egg thinking. Why wouldn't they just continue funding it, the actual council or controlling authority?
My question is, why would I clean up the weeds if I know that ultimately DPI is going to clean it up for me at their cost?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Sorry, Member Leslie.
well, we've got, no, that's fine, you're the chairman. Yeah, very right. It's, the point of the thing is to try and get some teeth into the Biosecurity Act, and so that councils, general purpose councils or county councils that can actually do the work. But we've also got to watch out for the state government's penchant for cost shifting.
Yes.
Yeah, so that we've got to make sure that doesn't end up turning around and, well, this is a really great idea, and by the way, here's the sub clause that the county councils pay 80%. No, it's just that needs to be somehow put into the
Well,
process.
I think Member Reynolds 3 weeks ago He did have DPI ask him about this, and when he started expressing the magnitude of the issue about how much it would cost to clean up a whole lot of properties. So if we've got, let's say, 70 properties and it expands over X number of hectares, what it's going to cost. I think you used the 611, didn't you?
That's, yeah, but that's not,
No.
it's a broader figure.
Yeah, broader figure.
Less the figure than that.
And the DPI actually, I think, understood the fact that there is a real, magnitude. We're not talking about a few $100,000 here. We're talking about millions, tens of millions. So I think that Member Reynolds, adequately expressed that. I tried to at the State Weeds Council, but I think Member Reynolds reinforced it quite forcefully at Dubbo a few weeks ago. So I think there's now an understanding that it would be beyond the means of any local control authority to be able to fund this. So.
And Mr. Chair, may I say that when we get to the second motion, there is issues about funding in that one. So we'll come to that shortly.
Okay, any other discussion on the first motion?
Just one supplementary question. Sorry, Mr. Chair, was there in your structure, was there a proposed figure?
No.
Copy. Thank you.
We wanted the concepts agreed first, then we have to discuss figures. Any other issues? Staff, I'll ask you. Okay, can we move to the second motion then? I think we're going to move these together, so we may as well have a discussion on the second one now. Member Reynolds, do you want to talk to this?
So again, the second motion, which comes back to Member Leslie's sort of concerns about funding and future funding, was to try and secure more funding from a state rather than the local councils. And as highlighted in the previous motion or recommendation with regard to our financials, as in our WAP funding allocation has been reasonably flat in percentage terms, whereas our local government contribution has been going up at a reasonably substantial rate. So I've tried to put together a motion here that provides a more secure funding stream and does involve the state government. So in looking at providing more financial resources to empower, to enable the proper application of the Biosecurity Act, i.e. we have 5 biosecurity officers, a chief biosecurity officer, and a couple of other staff that work, but to actually adequately fund so we can go and do proper inspections. And that may also include satellite inspections or other inspections, whether it's drones, satellites, helicopters, whatever, but to actually resource it. At the moment, we don't have the resources to get into those hard to get to areas very easily, but also, as we saw there with the flat WAP funding, to at least index it to inflation, which is running close to 7% at the moment. So if we have another flat year, we're 7% behind from a state government revenue point of view with our WAP funding. The councils will put it up by the peg rate. So I've suggested here inflation or the pegging rate, and then to actually match the current funding by councils, which I think possibly answers Member Leslie, where there's been a major cost shifting onto local councils in actually funding. We work to at least get it back to a 50-50, where at the moment it's about 33%, 66% or somewhere around that vicinity, but to try and get it back to 50-50 so councils aren't just carrying a major burden in weed control under the 2015 Biosecurity Act. So hopefully that outlines what we're proposing to do here with this second motion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member Reynolds. Any other comments?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. No, I'd just like to congratulate the member on a good, well-worded motion. And support it. Thank you.
Yeah, again, I hope that Member Reynolds is going to get the chance to speak to this at the conference, because
Number 274.
That's the risk.
And not that I want to tell him how to speak on it, but weeds are the scourge of a viable country area, of a viable farming community, and that's sort of those phrases like that need, bit of emotional language need to be put to city councils, so that they actually understand the importance of it. I mean, it's not just a case of a few blackberries that some kids go and pick their blackberries and make blackberry pies out of it. And how dare they take these away? It's actually, it's a fundamental issue of the viability of the country itself,
Can I
of the nation itself.
Can I suggest you two form a subcommittee to talk about the language and the rhetoric?
Well, I certainly hope that Leslie's coming to the LGA conference because, so I'd love you to second the motion. But to just back up Member Leslie's comments, I think the figure is $1.8 billion a year it costs agriculture in the state. So it's you're talking nearly $2 billion lost production because of weeds. So
That's adding the money.
that's right. I see, we're earning the
The
state.
biggest input cost to the agricultural industry. Weeds. And because of the seasonal conditions, which we all obviously love at the moment, but the weeds have gone rampant, as we know. And the governments have acknowledged that, but they've got to put money where the acknowledgement of the problem is.
So, Mr. Chair, may I also just make one other point? I did go to the State Biosecurity Conference a couple of weeks ago in Dubbo. I was invited to be on a panel, and I was the only local government person on any of the panels, and also highlighted, and the only local government person, or the only person really to highlight weeds. The 95% of that conference was on foot and mouth disease, lumpy skin, and major funding announcements for animal diseases. There was no new funding for weeds, biosecurity and control support for weed work. So it was very one focused. There was a large amount of extra money announced, but zero for weeds. And so I was sort of a lone voice at that conference, but really tried to put my voice forward, as you would probably be aware, members. I'm not quite. So, but that's the challenge. Weeds aren't getting the headline. It's foot and mouth disease and lumpy skin at the moment, and that's where the money's going.
Yeah, and maybe I've just written something down for the workshop to discuss. Yes, okay, thank you. Anything else? All right, all in favour of proposed recommendations that these two motions go to the local government New South Wales conference? All in favour unanimously. Thank you, everyone. That concludes the extraordinary general meeting at 1:47 p.m. Okay, we can cease the recording and return to the working